What might be some telltale signs for somebody if they were being raised in a narcissistic environment?
Big one is just not feeling supported by the parent or being gaslit if you speak up about something that you know is wrong.
Is it fair to say in a traditional narcissistic family system that the children are then pitted against each other?
Yeah.
So can you just paint a picture of what that might look like for someone?
I mean, it may look like leaning on one child more heavily and kind of going to that child for support and advice and almost discarding or neglecting the other child.
Welcome, everybody. I am your host, Stacey Uhrig, and this is Flip Your Mindset, the podcast. And today's guest is Susie Miller Wendel. Hey, Susie, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Good. I'm so happy to have you guys. I met Susie through my trauma recovery coaching. She too is a certified trauma recovery coach. And then we bumped into each other again when we were in a CEU that we were each taking, which was on narcissistic abuse. And lucky for us, Susie's taken some of her own personal experiences with narcissistic abuse and is being a warrior and somebody in the forefront of trying to help people go through their own challenges. Let me just read to you something I've written up here for her. Experiencing narcissistic abuse in her marriage, as well as post-separation, and navigating how to co-parent with someone who's narcissistic and high conflict can be very, very challenging. This, combined with hearing client stories of people who experienced their own narcissistic abuse at the hands of a parent, inspired her to write a book, which is going to be released later this year, probably at the beginning of the new year, 2024. And the subject of the book is raising thriving children after leaving a narcissistic partner. And I told Susie when I was reading this that I have 4 clients right now that I would gift this book to, because this is what they're really searching for. How do they keep their children whole through this whole process? Fortunately for Susie, she didn't experience narcissistic abuse as a child. However, and this is so important, she grew up in a household where being good, excelling in sports and school, and having the right friends was heavily rewarded. And this influenced her as an adult. And guys, we could do a whole podcast on that. And I talk about this a lot. I believe she believes it contributed to her feeling stuck in her marriage, not wanting to give up. In her career, she had a high-paying job for 17 years, but was unfulfilled for much of that time until she left in 2020. She made a drastic career change at that time, ventured into entrepreneurship, starting in real estate investing, which she still does, and then eventually into her calling, which is trauma recovery coaching. She's a single mom for 10 years. She's been in a great relationship for the last 6, but with no plans to combine households until the kids are grown and out of the house. She calls that living apart together, which I think is great. And I know a lot of people doing that lot.
I'm telling you, it's a way to go.
Yeah. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for that lovely introduction.
Yeah.
You captured it all really well.
I'm really happy to have you. And for the essence of time, I really just want to dive into it. So you're writing this book on how to help parents with their children who are thriving through either narcissistic parenting or it's some sort of family dynamic that involves narcissism. Tell me what inspired you to write that book.
Yeah, I think you mentioned it briefly. Really, it was a combination of a couple of things. It was being approached by clients who, as adults, are just trying to come to terms with what happened to them as children at the hands of their parents. Either they had one narcissistic parent, or in some cases, both parents were narcissistic. And, as adults, they're just now kind of coming to the realization of the fact that it was a very unhealthy upbringing. They're understanding now how they've been impacted, and they're facing certain struggles in life as adults just because, of the things that they experienced as children. So as these people approached me, I, again, like you said, I was fortunate that I didn't experience narcissistic abuse as a child. So I wanted to educate myself more on the topic so I could help these clients more effectively. So as I started researching, I started learning more about narcissistic family systems, and I had some light bulb moments where I started making some connections of things I was seeing with my own kids and their interactions with their dad. So I started looking for more and more resources for parents who are navigating this in real time, and trying to help their kids through these situations. And I found that there just aren't a ton of resources out there for those parents. There are a lot of resources for that adult who is realizing their childhood was unhealthy, and how can they start healing and how can they start understanding it. But again, for the parent who's navigating in real time, I couldn't find a lot out there. So I thought, what if I could make a book, write a book to help these parents so that we don't have these adults later on down the road trying to, pick up the pieces and get their lives, back in order and start healing. So that's really what inspired me to write the book. So I'm really excited about it because I think it's needed.
It is needed. And it's funny because, not funny, it's ironic. Let's just use that term, because I had a current client who is going through this right now. She's going through separation, mediation, and she has 3 children.
Yeah.
And she's like, help me help them. Like, what do I need to do to make sure they come the least fucked up out of this situation?
Absolutely. Right? Yeah.
So when I'm a cursor guy, so sorry, Susie.
Okay. No, I love it. Bring it on.
So one question I have is, what was the most surprising thing that you learned while you were researching for this book?
I think the most surprising thing is that there are clear designated roles that are created by narcissistic personalities within their family systems. I think we've all heard of the golden child and a scapegoat, but there's other roles in addition to that. And just like being in a relationship with a narcissist, being parented by a narcissist there are certain tactics that narcissistic people use. There are, again, these specific roles that people are made to play. So I think that was the most surprising thing to me, is just that this is a pretty common thing, within a narcissistic family system, to have specific roles for people.
How would you define a narcissistic family system?
It is a system where the narcissistic parent, and I think in an effort to maintain power and control of their family members, creates designated roles to keep that power and control, to keep people doing what they need to do to prevent them from ganging up together on the narcissist. I think that's that's a good question. I haven't really defined it necessarily, but I think that kind of sums it up.
And how would somebody know, like, maybe somebody's listening and they're like, well, maybe my parents were narcissistic, or maybe I was being raised in a narcissistic household. What might be some telltale signs for somebody if they were being raised in a narcissistic environment? They knew something was off, but they just didn't have that kind of language to describe it.
I think a big one is just not feeling supported by the parent. In some cases, if you're playing a role similar to, like a scapegoat type role, not feeling supported, or being gaslit if you speak up about something that is wrong, either being told that didn't happen, or you're remembering it wrong, or whatever it might be. There can be blatant abuse like neglect. That's a role that some narcissists put children into, is the lost child, which is just a neglected child. And then there's also, on the complete opposite side, is the golden child. So if you were, put on a pedestal, if you constantly received praise for doing things well, if you were kind of that trophy that your parent was holding up as a sign of their superior parenting, those can be some signs that you were raised in that type of an environment.
I know when I think about it, when I think about my own childhood, when I coach with other people, one of the things that really comes across is just this constant sense of it's never enough.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So is it fair to say that if a parent is walking with narcissistic traits and they're parenting from that seat, that no matter how somebody shows up, even when they're trying to fall in line with the parent, it's still never enough? And I don't just mean grades, guys, or sports. It could just be how you're eating your cereal. It
Right.
could be how you're wearing your hair. It could be the people that you're hanging out with. It could be the way that you walk to school. Like every single thing is criticized and seen as a flaw. And being told it could be done better, differently than it's being done.
Absolutely. Yes. That's not uncommon either.
So I'd love to talk a little bit more about these cast of characters. We're using some language that you and I are familiar with, but not everybody may be. So can you talk about this role of the golden child?
Yeah. Like I briefly mentioned, the golden child is typically the child within the family who excels, who excels in school, who excels in sports. Oftentimes they're outwardly attractive. They're the good-looking kid who does things right, so to speak. And they're the child that the narcissist kind of selects to be, again, that symbol of their excellent parenting, because we know narcissists, they want people to view them as being great at everything. And parenting is a huge part of that. They want people to believe that they're a good parent. So they love having that golden child that they can kind of show to the world that, here's my example of my perfect parenting.
And how about the scapegoat?
The scapegoat it's kind of what you just were describing a minute ago. It's that child that is made to feel like they really can't do anything right. They're oftentimes blamed for problems within the family. Oftentimes they're given consequences that are more severe than the other kids within the family. They're just overall just made to feel like they cannot do right within the family system.
And I know that you talked about this briefly, but is it fair to say in a traditional narcissistic family system that the children are then pitted against each other?
Correct. Yeah.
So can you just paint a picture of what that might look like for someone?
Sure. Narcissists, they use triangulation a lot in their relationships in general, and within the family system, that it's no different. So oftentimes they will pit children against each other. So again, they can't join forces and be a strong force against the narcissist. They want that conflict to be occurring. It may look like, I'm trying to think, leaning on one child more heavily and kind of going to that child for support and advice, and almost discarding or neglecting the other child. So these kids see these different dynamics, and naturally they're going to start disliking each other when they see that different treatment between such different treatment between the kids within the family. They're not going to have a great relationship.
What about the lost child?
Yeah, the lost child is that child that is kind of forgotten or neglected. They may not have all their needs fulfilled or met. They typically spend a lot of times by themselves and retreat, into their rooms, into their own space, because they're not getting the attention and affection that the other children within the family are getting. So
now, when we're in this narcissistic family system and there are two parents and one parent is narcissistic or showing narcissistic traits, but the other parent is not, but is not stopping it. I know that this can be kind of defined as like the enabler.
Correct.
What can you tell us about the enabler within this family system?
The enabler, like you mentioned, it is often the spouse or the partner. There are some cases where a child can also be put into that role, but it's typically the partner. If you've been in a relationship with someone who's narcissistic, you know that feeling of constantly trying to appease them, walking on eggshells to prevent the next, explosive, angry outburst that they might have. So you're put in a position where, you might see your child being berated by the narcissistic parent, and you're afraid of stepping in to defend them because then you're going to take the brunt of it. You're made to be an enabler to almost just try to keep the peace within the family. But as a result, it means your children may view you down the road as not having stood up for them, not having defended them. And it can create a whole nother host of issues, not only between the child and their narcissistic parent, but between the child and the enabler as well.
Amen. And, I know that typically in this kind of family system, when there is an enabler, really, I shouldn't even say when there's an enabler, when there's two partners and one's narcissistic and one's not, there tends to be a couple of words that fly around the verse, the metaverse, the social verse, that I think I'd love to get defined here. One is codependency and one is trauma bond. What can you tell us about these things and why are they important to understand?
I mean, they're a huge part of narcissistic abuse. I think codependency, oftentimes when we come out of a narcissistically abusive relationship, we start learning about ourselves and what our relationship attachment styles are like. And a lot of us discover that we have been codependent. We've been, kind of losing ourselves in the relationship and really depending on the partner that we're with as our source of happiness and feeling like we need them in our lives in order to be whole. So that's a huge part of I think the narcissistic abuse pattern. The other one you mentioned, sorry, you said
the trauma bond.
The trauma bond. That's huge. A trauma bond is when you've been in an abusive relationship and you're experiencing such polar opposite behavior from your partner, a lot of hot and cold behavior. Some days are great, other days are just awful, and you don't know how you're going to survive. But it's that kind of up and down cycle of abuse that ends up keeping you enmeshed in the relationship because after some time passes after a negative event, oftentimes we forget this person, also will promise to change and we end up getting sucked back into the relationship again. But all of these cycles just result in us being bonded to that abusive person.
And can you explain why it's hard for somebody to break that bond?
It's hard, I think, because there's a chemical aspect to it. There are things happening inside your body and your brain throughout that cycle of abuse. During the good times, you've got these good chemicals running through your body. You've got serotonin. You've got I'm trying to remember all these words. Help me.
I know on the good side you've got the serotonin. On the challenging side you've got cortisol, adrenaline, yes, these stress hormones. So you've got again these strong chemicals at play within your body, and your body's telling you, it wants you to keep having these good chemicals coming through your body. So you become addicted to the relationship, even though it's not healthy for you. I think this is really important for people to understand. There is a biochemical component to the up and down manipulation that is being created in this kind of partnership relationship that the body craves. And also, correct, if one of the partners, say the non-narcissistic partner, because it's really interesting, narcissistic people will not typically partner well together, typically, right? Yeah. Because one has to be in control.
Yes.
So if you're finding yourself with a partnership with someone that is narcissistic and you are the non-narcissistic person, it may be that this kind of relationship is also familiar because you may have witnessed it or been parented by somebody who is also narcissistic. So this is your template for relationship. So it's also very hard to break because unless you've been modeled something else by, say, an aunt and uncle, or maybe an older sibling, or maybe a grandparent, you may not actually know what a healthy relationship looks like, and or you may not think it's available to you.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I have a lot of clients that come to me who are in these unhealthy relationships, and a lot of them experience narcissistic abuse as children. So it's not uncommon. I call it the uncomfortable comfort zone, where you find yourself in similar relationships down the road if you grew up in an unhealthy environment as a child, because that's what you're comfortable with, like you said.
And it's what you know.
Right.
Right. And it's really hard to make the familiar unfamiliar and the unfamiliar get into the other spot.
Right.
Let me ask you this. You mentioned it a little bit, and it's something I love to talk about, which is attachment style. And it's very common when I'm working with clients who are coming to me because they are in a dysfunctional relationship, and it could be with anyone. It could be with a partner. It could be with their own children. It could be with a sibling, a coworker, whatever it is, there's something stuck in the relationship. And I'll often send them some of the links that you and I got exposed to when we were in our trauma recovery training, to different quizzes that help somebody understand their attachment style.
Yeah. What is one of them? Sarah Payton, I think, is the one I
Payton has a very, very
clients.
good one.
Yeah, it's very good.
And Mastin Kipp has a really good one that comes up. Not Mastin Kipp. Mark Manson has a really good one. He's the guy that wrote Unfuck Yourself, right? So he has a really good part of his website that's all about relationships, and he talks a lot about attachment styles. So why is it important to understand someone's attachment style, and how does it play into this?
It's important to know your attachment style so you can start identifying your own patterns, your own tendencies as you get into a relationship. Especially if you're coming out of a narcissistically abusive relationship, it's really important to understand that, so that as you start dipping your toe in the dating world, okay, when I meet someone, I have an insecure attachment style. I rate highly in that area. So, I may move really quickly to try to, get reassurance that this relationship is going somewhere. I may, try to just move things along and feel secure in the relationship, because that's something that I really need. But it can be to your detriment if you do that, so it's important to just understand what your own traits and behaviors are, so that you can be like, oh, okay, I'm doing this thing now, and I don't want to do this. I need to move more slowly, or I need to do this differently. It's just understanding those parts of yourself a little bit better.
And I find that with an insecure attachment style, especially one that's an anxious attachment style, I see often a lot of people pleasing, lack of boundary setting, deprioritizing self, and those things make you very attractive to somebody who is narcissistic, because they know that you're going to placate to whatever it is that they want, but they're going to create that by love bombing you first. Right. So I'm actually watching this really interesting Netflix right now called The Bad Surgeon. I don't know if you've seen that.
I've seen that. Yes.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
It's crazy.
So crazy.
And we're in episode 2 of 3. And it's a true story about a neurosurgeon. So I won't spill the beans because I haven't gotten to the end yet, but
I won't do any
it's
spoilers.
very clear that this guy is walking with some sort of narcissistic and or sociopathic and or maybe even psychopathic traits, right?
Absolutely.
But in that series, one of the people that's speaking a lot is I'm just at the part where like they're about to get married. That's where I'm at the part. So we haven't gotten to that yet, but one of the voices of the documentary is this person that was engaged to this surgeon. And she talks a lot about the love bombing. So can you help me define love bombing for the listeners?
Love bombing, what that looks like and feels like, is somebody coming on really strong very early on in the relationship. giving a high level of praise and admiration, even though they don't know you very well. And, making promises early on as well for the future, or trying to advance the relationship really quickly, maybe introducing you to the parents early on, talking about moving in together early on, just anything that feels like, wow, this is moving really quickly. And again, I think the big telltale sign is somebody just showering you with admiration, compliments, all these things. Again, without really knowing you that well yet.
I think that's the point. I was listening to Dr. Ramani talk about this, and I think someone was asking her, well, like, are we supposed to discredit like when people are doing nice for us? Mm-hmm. And she was just saying it's about the level of intensity,
right,
and the frequency at such an early stage in the relationship. It's not normal.
Right.
Because
and somebody not, you mentioned just not respecting boundaries too. I think that's not necessarily love bomby, but it kind of goes hand in hand with that love bombing stage too.
Mm-hmm. So. And again, if someone's anxious and insecure in their attachment style, mm-hmm. and they're unsure of themselves, because that's a big aftermath of coming out of narcissistic parenting. And it's also a huge aftermath of coming out of a narcissistically abusive relationship. Mm-hmm. It's going to feel very affirming.
Right.
Even if the person doesn't really embody it, they might not believe it about themselves, but they might go to the extreme of like, wow, well, it must be real, because like, I'm not really that worthy of it, but yet they're showering me. Mm-hmm. I try hard to be careful when I'm working with clients let me pack it up. Sometimes I'm working with clients that have come out of narcissistic abuse, and they're starting to see the picture a little bit clearer. Mm-hmm. They're starting to see the entire relationship from like a drone's eye view than the myopic view that they were in. And everything's starting to shatter and crumble because they're starting to realize that nothing was real. Mm-hmm. Okay. And they start to see that even that phase at the beginning of their relationship, because very often they'll say, I just want to go back to the beginning. It was so perfect at the beginning. And I don't really say much, because it's not for me to say it was probably love bombing. Mm-hmm. But when they're able to come to me and say, was that even real? It's hard sometimes to create that soft space to say, I can't really say if it was real or not. I certainly wasn't there. But I think if you're starting to question it, you're probably onto something.
Yeah.
So how do you help people when they're in that phase? And also they do maybe have children with this person, right? And they're starting to recognize that literally everything was part of a chess game. Mm-hmm. From the moment that they met, from every single date, from every single decision, it's like you were actually a pawn in a chess match that you did not ever know was going on.
Right.
And now they know they're going to have to still interact with this person in parallel parenting or co-parenting.
Yeah.
And now they're worried about their child, because now they can recognize how much manipulation was happening that was so covert. They didn't know it was happening until they were out of it, but they have to, in many cases, they have to force their child to go in order to stay in compliance with whatever court decision was as far as visitation. It gets very, very complicated.
Yeah.
How do you coach somebody through that? What can you speak to with regards to that?
Well, I mean, a big part of my book is about like looking inward and understanding how narcissistic abuse has affected you. And I lay out some simple steps to take to start the healing process. But in order to be this, safe and stable parent for your kids, you have to start with yourself. You have to, again, get that understanding of how you're affected and figure out what resources are going to work best for you to start your healing journey. So that's really where I start. Even though my book is about the kids in the end, it starts with you. And
what are some tips that you can give to people on how to start to heal that way?
Mm-hmm. Some of the things I lay out in my book are, first of all, I just have some education around how can people be impacted by narcissistic abuse. And that was something that I really didn't understand early on when I got out of my marriage, that, it can cause PTSD, it can cause complex PTSD. So I lay out what those symptoms are, for people to read and say, okay, well, I have been experiencing that. I need to go to a therapist if I don't have one and start working through some of these ways I've been impacted.
What might that look like? How would somebody know? Like, can you just pull a little snippet if you can think about, what would it mean that somebody's struggling with PTSD or CPTSD? What might that present as? How would it affect them?
Yeah, it can be a number of things. I think nervous system regulation is a huge part when you're in an abusive relationship. It really wreaks havoc on your nervous system. So when you come out of it, you'll find that you're easily triggered by things that maybe you wouldn't have been in the past. Feeling, a lot of brain fog, your short-term memory can be affected. So you might find that you're really forgetful and are just struggling kind of from a cognitive standpoint to navigate through your day-to-day life. Anxiety and depression can be an outcome from narcissistic abuse. Trying to think what I haven't mentioned yet.
I feel like I see a lot of self-doubt.
Yeah, a lot of self-doubt, low self-worth, because you're cut down for so long that when you come out of it, you struggle to really believe in yourself and believe that you can even be on your own in some cases because you've been told you can't. Lack of confidence, those types of things are all things that can come out of that.
So if I'm correct in hearing you say, the first step in helping the child is the parent who's solely responsible for the child or has primary custody of the child, even if they don't have primary custody, let's face it, needs to do their own work first and or in tandem with how they're supporting their kids.
Correct. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So the mental health aspect is a big part of that healing journey. Finding a support system, whether it's, family, friends, finding a supportive community that has been through similar experiences, or a single parent group or something like that. Finding ways to take care of yourself, or where maybe you've been neglecting that in the past. And just kind of rediscovering yourself and what brings you joy and what you want your future to look like, and start getting excited about that rather than living in that past life that you've been in.
You know what I hear a lot from the women that I coach that are just kind of very freshly and newly either out of the narcissistic abuse, and it was maybe a marriage, and maybe they're just on the tail end of getting a divorce or whatever, or like maybe even when they're working with me, they're starting to put the dots together, because I'm never going to spell it out because I've not been there. Right. And I don't know this person, but as I listen and I listen and I listen, I might ask them to listen to certain resources or read certain snippets of something to see if it resonates. Right. Oh gosh, I had a question for you on that.
I bet it was a good one too.
It was a good one.
You have really good questions. You always have such good questions.
It'll come back to me.
Okay.
It'll come back to me. This is how it rolls, guys. And I'm not going to edit this shit out.
No,
I'm not a perfect person, right? So I'm going to come back to it because I know it's going to come back to me. But, so often I hear from these clients, I think my kids are okay. Now, keep in mind, there's probably been chaos. There's probably been some disruption in the house. Okay. And they're looking around saying, well, I really actually think my kids are okay. And I'm putting that in quotes. But maybe they don't know what signs to look for.
Right.
So what signs should a parent look for to know that the child is struggling and not actually thriving?
It can vary between children and again, what role they've been placed in. I think it's most difficult to see the signs for a child like the golden child, because that child has learned that in order to be safe and in order to be loved, they have to be perfect. They don't have any problems. Everything's all good, So even once you've gotten out of that relationship and you're in a separate household, it takes time for that golden child to actually be able to open up and kind of, disclose that maybe they're not doing okay. So it takes a little bit more work, I think, for that type of situation in that child. The other roles, like I'll give the example of the scapegoat child. Usually that child is the one that is more vocal and who's more likely to, first of all, kind of call the narcissist out on what they're doing. But as a result, they're the child that's more likely to kind of be more open about how they're feeling and what they're doing, how it's affected them. So it really can kind of vary depending on what role that child's made to play. But, it could look like acting out, not performing well in school, losing interest in certain things, certain activities, just any change that's not consistent with the child's normal behavior, I think is something to be looking for. But within my book, I do outline for the different roles how children can be affected specific to that role. And also just, what are some of those specific tactics that narcissists use and how children can be affected by those.
Awesome.
So
I want to, as we wrap up, I know I said I was going to do this earlier and then I forgot, Susie. I want to go through and help you show, because sometimes if people are watching this, it's going to help. If you just want to talk through one more time, the different cast of characters when it comes to narcissistic family systems and narcissistic abuse.
Yes, I can do that.
And
so
I'll
the first one, we've touched briefly on them, so I won't go into great detail, but the first one's the scapegoat. So this is the child that's oftentimes labeled as the rebel or the bad kid by the narcissist, and leaving them like they feel like they can't do anything right, like you mentioned earlier. They are the target of the narcissist's anger, rage, and criticism, and they often receive really harsh punishments, sometimes unreasonable punishments for things that they've done. The child can go in a couple different ways when they're placed in this role outside of the home. They might become really overachieving, trying to prove the narcissistic parent wrong. Or they might say, okay, yeah, I am bad. I am the rebel, and behave that way outside of the family home.
Right.
As an adult, this child may have difficulty trusting people and forming meaningful relationships, and they're the ones that are most likely to leave the narcissistic family system altogether. I think this is the client that I get approached by the most, who has been put in this scapegoat role, and they are trying to figure out if they can even have contact with their family anymore because it's been so toxic for them. They're also the child that's most likely to suffer from complex PTSD as an adult and have feelings of worthlessness and shame around themselves. The golden child, like I've mentioned, is that child that's given the special treatment by the narcissist and is viewed as a perfect example of their parenting. They're usually an attractive, outwardly happy child, a high achiever. And again, they've learned to behave and to be perfect as a way to keep the narcissist happy and to keep themselves safe. They can develop extreme anxiety when confronted with criticism or failure, and might develop their own narcissistic tendencies as well. This is the child that's most likely to actually become a narcissist themselves later on down the road. They also may struggle with codependency, insecure attachment in relationships, and might find themselves in a similarly abusive relationship as adults.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And let's just talk about that lost child before we wrap up.
Yeah. So the lost child is the one who's neglected by the narcissist and often feels invisible within that family system. They struggle to understand where they fit in. They aren't receiving praise or acknowledgement when it's due. So as a result, they also may develop feelings of worthlessness and shame and just overall insecurity. They feel unloved and struggle to self-validate due to that lack of validation that they're getting in the household. And they're the most likely to develop depression and even possibly substance use addictions as adults.
Yeah. I think the work that you're doing is incredible. And I think it's really necessary. And I only know it because I'm working with a couple clients right now with young children, and they're going, help me help my children.
Well, I will send the book your way when it's ready so you can give that to your clients.
Because I'm often, scouring Amazon or calling past family relatives or past friends who've been through this saying, what did you use? And you're right. A lot of, I can think of one book that one person has given to me all along the way. They're kind of the lost children in and all of itself. It's like the last collateral damage of this it's really a kind of domestic abuse, guys. We really have to call it what it is. So thank you so much. If people want to learn more about what you do and also maybe get notified about when the book is going to drop, where can they get that information?
The best way would be just to follow me on social and my YouTube channel, because I'll be posting updates there regularly here through the next month, because I'm targeting by end of February to have this book published. So you can find me on Instagram at Susie Miller Wendel. My YouTube channel is the same, Susie Miller Wendel. I'm most active on those two platforms. And you can always feel free to email me as well if you want to be added to my subscriber list for emails. And my email for that is nurturingafternarcissism@gmail.com.
Beautiful. So thank you so much for being our guest.
It was so great to see you.
Oh my gosh.
Keep up the good work on your end as well.
It takes a village. So guys, again, if you love this podcast and you want to hear more about narcissistic abuse, I have a ton of episodes about narcissistic abuse. One of my favorites is from narcissistic abuse survivor Nikki Redican. It's a 2-part series way on early. A few years ago. So what you want to do is you want to subscribe to Flip Your Mindset, the podcast, wherever you catch your casts, or if you're watching this on YouTube, you want to subscribe because I drop a new episode every single Monday and you'll want to be alerted for that as well. Or you're going to want to tune into my newsletter so you can get that drop as well. And you can get that right off my website at flipyourmindset.com. Susie, thank you so much for joining us today. And I will be sure to put it into my newsletter when that book gets dropped.
Oh, thank you. I would appreciate that. And I will send you my copies.
Thanks so much.
All right. Well, take care. Have a good rest of your day.
Same.
All right. Bye.
Take care, guys.